Russian forces were trying something unusual again, this time sending a large group of soldiers on motorcycles roaring toward Ukrainian positions. Their plan was simple: stay small, move fast, and flank the defenders with minimal losses. They believed it could work. But both the infantry on the ground and the drone operators above were already waiting. The low rumble of engines echoed through the trees, and the Ukrainians sprang into action. First, they needed to pinpoint where the entire group was coming from. The Russians emerged from the cover of the trees and gave themselves away. At first glance, 4 motorcycles could be seen weaving through the open ground. The Ukrainians were certain there were more. The first wave of kamikaze drones launched, zipping low and fast toward their targets. The Russian riders had no idea what hit them. Explosions tore through the column, and panic set in. Some of the motorcyclists gunned their throttles, trying desperately to escape. But in their confusion, they tangled with one another, the rear riders slamming into those ahead, turning their retreat into a chaotic wreck of twisted bikes and dust. They knew the second wave of Russian infantry would attack alongside, so Ukrainian command wasted no time in sending reinforcements. The battle was no longer just in the air, it was spreading across the ground as well. Amid the chaos, a 3-man Russian motorcycle team was spotted trying to slip around the armored units and flank the Ukrainian lines. A kamikaze drone was dispatched immediately. The strike hit hard, leaving the riders shaken. Desperate, they began dragging their wounded comrade out of the wreckage, trying to escape as Ukrainian eyes tracked their every move. Meanwhile, infantry reinforcements were deployed directly into the firefight, and the field began to boil with intensity. Ukrainian troops advanced methodically, clearing the area trench by trench. Then, the reconnaissance drone spotted something ahead. A lone Russian soldier in a trench, frantically fiddling with his machine gun. But it wouldn't fire. From the command center, Ukrainian officers watched in astonishment. Poor maintenance of his weapon would cost him his life. Coordinates were relayed instantly to the advancing infantry. Grenades rained down into the trench like a deadly storm. The 2 forward enemy positions ahead of them were struck next, this time by Ukrainian drones dropping explosives from above. It was a perfectly coordinated assault, pressing forward both from the skies and from the ground, step by relentless step. Another team dropped into position, slipping through the dense forest to catch the Russian forces in a deadly crossfire. The terrain was unforgiving. The forest itself had become a chaotic blur of smoke and gunfire so thick they could hardly see a few feet ahead. And yet, through sheer courage and relentless determination, they pushed on, their resolve keeping them alive in the heart of the battle. Just as the Ukrainian infantry maneuvered deeper into the forest, it wasn't their eyes but a reconnaissance drone from the command center that spotted the Russian soldiers trying to slip away. The coordinates came through immediately. Without hesitation, an FPV drone was dispatched, striking the targets and eliminating the threat. Now, with the danger removed, the infantry tightened their formation, ready to close in and trap the remaining Russians in a tightening noose. The Russian troops had scattered in disarray, breaking into small groups and vanishing into the terrain. It was chaos, and if left unchecked, they could slip through and stage a deadly infiltration. The Ukrainian command center knew they had to identify as many as possible before it was too late. They called in help from a neighboring drone team. Within minutes, the buzzing of FPV drones filled the air, weaving through the fields with pinpoint precision. Several of the hidden Russian infantry were quickly located and struck where they hid. But not all of them. Some of the scattered Russian soldiers were quickly loaded into military vehicles in a desperate attempt to extract them from the area. But the Ukrainians had anticipated this move and acted immediately. From the very first strike, the Russian vehicles fought frantically to escape, careening across the battlefield without even glancing back at the soldiers who fell from the trucks or vanished in explosions. Their only focus was the main road. If they could reach it, they could pick up speed and maybe shake off the drones that hunted them. One by one, the vehicles were struck down, each eruption of fire and smoke cutting their numbers further. As the FPV drones bore down, panic swept through the Russian infantry. They leapt from their vehicles, scattering into the ruins and brush for cover. But the drones pursued them relentlessly, neutralizing many before they could escape. In the end, reports indicated that only a single vehicle managed to break through and head toward the main road. But it wasn't by chance. There was a reason that one was allowed to go. Thanks to that vehicle, the hiding place of the Russian assault troops was finally pinpointed. A crumbling ruin on the outskirts of the battlefield. The coordinates were quickly relayed and a MiG-29 was armed with a GBU-62 bomb and scrambled toward the target. The pilot lined up his run. Seconds later, the ruin vanished in a massive plume of dust and debris. The building flattened in an instant. Meanwhile, the battle raged on at full intensity. Ukrainian forces launched a massive assault to drive the enemy out of the area once and for all. Tanks and armored personnel carriers rolled forward alongside the infantry, while heavy surprise weapons waited silently in the rear, ready for their moment. The infantry dismounted and pushed into the contested zone, trying to dislodge the Russian defenders, but the enemy was dug in well. In the midst of the clash, 3 Russian soldiers raised their hands and surrendered. They were immediately taken into custody. Commander Rullo personally insisted on interrogating one of them. Under questioning, the prisoner revealed a disturbing truth. A large Russian battalion was preparing to launch a counterattack very soon. And sure enough, it wasn't long before his words proved true. The Ukrainian command center immediately deployed reinforcements to the field. The fighting intensified, chaos filling the air as visibility dropped, and every meter became harder to hold. Ukrainian troops began to struggle against the renewed onslaught. Heavy weapons roared in the soldiers' hands as they fired back with everything they had, while armored vehicles joined in, unleashing their own relentless firepower. Then, just as the tide threatened to turn, the surprise weapons were unleashed. The enemy's exact coordinates were confirmed, and the order was given to the 155mm guns to open fire. At first, coordinated artillery fire rained down on enemy positions, effective but not enough. That's when the BM-21 Grad systems roared to life, saturating the battlefield with devastating rocket barrages. In the haze of smoke and fire, their launch rails flared brilliantly as a storm of rockets streaked upward, leaving fiery trails across the sky. By the end, only a small group of about 9 or 10 Russian soldiers remained. That's when a Ukrainian tank commander made a bold decision. Spotting the scattered group nearby, he drove his tank straight into the woods after them. Smashing through trees, he relentlessly pursued the fleeing Russians. Finally chasing them completely out of the area. It was an astonishing sight. In the command center, officers watched the scene unfold in real time, cheering as if they were watching a scene from Prison Break. They had swept the enemy from their positions and forced them into retreat. A dramatic, decisive victory. Now we're returning to the bombing site. On the far right side of the targeted building, a single vehicle had miraculously survived the initial strike and sped away through the dust. At the forest's edge, they abandoned the vehicle and ran. That's when the artillery fire caught up with them, pounding the area relentlessly. Desperate, they tried to disappear deeper into the woods. But the drones were already overhead, circling, watching. And one by one, they were hunted down and neutralized. Reconnaissance drones kept a close watch on the Russians' forward fortifications. They had dug in deep within a dense forest, concealed under the thick canopy. From there, they launched repeated attacks on the forward positions of the K2 battalion. The counteroffensive began with a swarm of FPV drones streaking into the trees, sending Russian soldiers scattering in panic. Then came the artillery, pounding the area with relentless fire. The key objective here was clear: neutralize their firepower. And they did it well. One precise shell found its mark, slamming into a Russian vehicle and setting it ablaze. Thick, black smoke rose above the trees as the crew abandoned the wreck, flames licking higher with each passing second. The fire threatened to spread, likely igniting nearby ammunition and equipment as well. On the other flank, an MTLB rumbled forward toward Ukrainian positions. It was a tactic the Russians had been using repeatedly over the past few days. But this time, a waiting anti-tank missile struck it squarely, sending the vehicle lurching to a halt. One by one, the Russian infantry bailed out of the vehicle. They scattered backward into cover, trying to escape the incoming fire. With no crew left inside, a Ukrainian drone swooped in and finished the MTLB off with a direct hit. Almost immediately, a second MTLB entered the field. But it didn't make it far. This one hit a mine that had been planted earlier by the K2 battalion and came to a dead stop. The area was quickly turning into a graveyard of Russian armor. In the next wave, the Russians moved more cautiously. To shield themselves from the ever-present anti-tank missiles, they deployed smoke and even sent up a drone to watch over the advance. At the tip of the column was a tank, followed by two more MTLBs creeping forward. Behind them trailed a cage-armored vehicle moving slowly over the torn-up road. But as the convoy slowed, a Ukrainian drone struck the rear MTLB, knocking it out. The second MTLB tried to press on, racing to close the gap to the lead tank, hoping to find safety behind its armor. Another drone struck it hard, but it kept moving, managing to catch up with the tank. Now the two vehicles were side by side, making themselves an easier target. Ukrainian operators seized the opportunity and laid down an effective blockade, forcing both vehicles to turn back, but retreat offered no real safety. A Ukrainian tank was already waiting for them farther back, though it wasn't even needed. As the Russians fell back toward the factory they had been using as a stronghold, an FPV drone chased them down, ensuring at least one of them wouldn't make it out alive, stopping dead in its tracks. No matter what happens, the Russian troops never seem to learn. And this was one of the clearest examples of that. A lone armored vehicle tried to cross the open ground and reach its own lines. No smoke, no cover, no protection of any kind. It was an easy mark for a Ukrainian drone, which struck it effortlessly. The vehicle belched smoke and tried to limp away, but soon ground to a halt, abandoned. A second drone finished the job with little effort. Before the wreck had even cooled, another Russian vehicle rolled onto the field. Just as recklessly, it drove past the smoldering hulk of the first, as if nothing had happened. It made it a little farther, until it hit a mine laid directly in its path. Russian soldiers scattered in all directions trying to escape. Moments later, a thermite drone swooped in to finish the vehicle, flames erupting from within. Then came a third vehicle. Why they kept trying was anyone's guess. It too passed right by the wreckage of the previous two and struck another mine. Once again, the crew jumped out and fled, leaving another carcass behind. The area was quickly turning into a metal graveyard, littered with wrecks. Now the exposed infantry became easy targets. Ukrainian drones picked them off one by one in the open field. Some of the Russians tried to take shelter in a nearby village, but they were hunted down as well, many neutralized in the process. The last soldier left standing was calm, almost eerily so. As the drone descended toward him, he just sat there watching it approach, as if having a quiet conversation with it. Maybe at that point he was ready for it to be over. And just like that, each reckless push was crushed in turn. If Russia keeps ignoring the technological superiority arrayed against them, they may find themselves retreating again and again.